Hello, Millennium listeners. I'm back here with another episode of Millennium Live. We have AIIR Consulting with us today, and to talk about AIIR Consulting and coming out of the pandemic is Jonathan Kirschner. He's the founder and CEO at AIIR, so we welcome him to the Millennium Live podcast. Jonathan, good to have you here, man.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So literally today, we're facing challenges exponentially more complex than anything we've faced in the past, and AIIR helps build better leaders, better teams, better company, and of course, a better and brighter future. So we're going to be talking about that. And to kick things off, let's talk about where we've been in the last 2 years. We're finally, hopefully coming out of a 2+ years of uncertainty around the pandemic, and waiting for us on the other side here is a very uncertain economy, and with uncertain effects that business, inflation, sure, but it's all affecting us on a personal level too. So I just want to get your thoughts to kick things off on this podcast about what you're seeing out there right now, the current climate. What's affecting leaders today, and who you're working with, and how it's also affecting your business at AIIR.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're coming out of a pandemic, and early on in that pandemic, there were a lot of consulting firms and thought leadership that focused on crisis leadership and concepts that were very salient when navigating the profound uncertainty, the pain, and challenges associated with a crisis, in that case, COVID. And a lot of the thought leadership and articles coming out of McKinsey referred to this sort of new next that we would somehow find ourselves emerging into. And I don't know about you, but for myself and a lot of the people, that provided a lot of hope. And it was sort of like there's a pot of gold coins at the end of this rainbow, or there's light at the end of this tunnel, whatever the right metaphor is. There's light and hope. And I think the biggest surprise for leaders around the world is that it really hasn't turned out to be that way. 2022 was kind of the year that folks were hoping, like, okay, this pandemic thing is, it's had a long tail, and we're going to now start to open up and start to lean in and experience this new next, really appreciate the fruits of our efforts, the benefits of a virtual first or hybrid working situation, all the flexibility that engenders. And we're going to finally be able to have a great year. And lo and behold, we have a war in Ukraine immediately following, or you could argue has been creeping up for some time, inflation, but runaway inflation, which has subsequently triggered an aggressive Fed to raise interest rates, which has subsequently hurt the U.S. economy, which is, of course, highly correlated to the rest of the world's economy. And then you have lockdowns in China that persist. And the confluence of all these things has created a macro environment that has been, pretty much the opposite of the fantasy that a lot of us had coming into 2022. And so it's been it hasn't been a crisis for everyone. But it has been a very arduous year that will end for many organizations in downsizing and rifts that only compounds the challenges with morale and engagement and burnout that a lot of companies are experiencing right now. So I would, the picture I'm painting is not a great one. And yet, as we say at AIIR Consulting, we have the opportunity to lead or be led, right? No matter what the external pressures and environment where the cards were dealt, we have the opportunity to step back and understand what can we control and what can we not control. And those things that we can't control, let's lead. Let's drive and take ownership and lead the way rather than be led by these waves of uncertainty that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we started the year with everything around the great resignation, right? Like everybody changing jobs, finding better opportunities. And now, every day it feels like in our feed we're seeing more and more, layoffs, and prices are always going up. There's always something happening. So, AIR Consulting is the premier provider of tech-enabled leadership consulting solutions. So I want to hear your thoughts on, what you're telling leaders out there to do in order to mitigate those effects that you're talking about. What are you doing and what are you telling leaders right now?
The way we think about leadership at AIR is it's setting a vision and then helping move people towards that vision. And all the skills required, we've actually codified this through our research. There's something like 48 skills. They fall under three big buckets for us in our experience, in our practice: leading self, leading others, and leading the organization. And so within those broad domains of skills, the advice that we're sharing with leaders right now is, on leading self, right now, if you don't fasten your seatbelt and put your, air mask on first, you're just not going to be able to have the juice required to serve the company and the organization, and to, in effect, move people towards a vision. So all the things we talk about in the realm of self-care are super important right now, because leaders are sort of running on low to empty in their gas tanks. And so, now is the time, to make sure you're taking care of yourself physically through exercise, maybe adopting some breathing or meditation or yoga. These are all things that are counterintuitive, of course, because, we need all that time to do our jobs. But I think that when leaders do it right, they realize that, sometimes taking out that time and slowing down actually helps them speed up. So self-care is really important. And also within that domain of leading self would be creating space for strategic thinking. So one of the sort of the double-edged sword of hybrid, right? So hybrid provides all this wonderful flexibility.
Sure.
The thing that we see, and this is actually really well documented in some fascinating research by Microsoft this past year, with 20,000 employees, they surveyed and saw an uptick of 153% rise in the amount of meetings compared to, say, spring 2022 versus pre-pandemic. So 153% rise in the amount of meetings that we have. And that's because if you're sitting at your desk on Zoom, you can book things back to back to back.
Yeah.
And for a while, we're like, wow, I'm getting a lot done. I'm really productive. But we don't realize is that doing that day in and day out actually constrains our ability to reflect, learn, and engage in strategic thinking, because we're always, each one of those meetings has then a certain set of outputs and things we have to do. And so we find ourselves stretched too thin. So creating space, and there's all sorts of ways to do that. It requires discipline and a little bit of counterintuitive thinking. And it can be done at the personal level and also at the organizational level. Like we work with some clients who are saying, hey, on Fridays, there are no meetings. You're not allowed to have a meeting on Friday. That's time to do heads down work and to engage in strategic thinking and learning, to actually setting blocks within your calendar and being disciplined about keeping those blocks for strategic thinking time. So that's in the self-care domain. In the leading others domain right now, communication, there's a real premium on good communication. If you're a good communicator, you're going to be a top manager right now. Communication effectiveness is the one skill that we think is really, really important, because when we're not seeing people physically every day, there's a lot of sort of mind reading and assumptions that occur. And then we wonder, like, why is this project late? Or why is this person underperforming? Are they underperforming? We don't know, because, we didn't set the expectations clearly, right? So that's sort of a timeless challenge, but it becomes more complicated as a function of the amount of change, the hybrid landscape that we're in, and the amount of noise going on in many organizations today. And then lastly, on the leading the organization, I think it's really, really important, right? Going back to that definition of leadership, setting the vision and moving people towards that vision. Because many leaders right now are so steeped in execution, they're not taking the time to reinforce the purpose, our reason for existence, our raison d'etre as an organization or as a team, and the vision that we have. We're really encouraging leaders to take that extra time and be very deliberate and strategic about communicating that. And it's not a one and done. You don't just communicate it in a letter or in a meeting or in an all hands or in a town hall. You've got to find ways to continually reinforce it. And again, just like with communication in the leading others domain, vision setting and the reinforcement of vision setting is something that really requires a strategy.
Communication's key, and finding that right balance, that recipe for success, especially in that hybrid world, is going to be very important for leaders. Specifically though, AIIR's consulting services, you've worked with leaders through economic collapse, through recessions, through we had social and political unrest amidst the pandemic, but certainly during it. What are you hearing from leaders right now at this time, and the challenges that leadership faces, but specifically leading a business in an uncertain environment must be extremely stressful. What are you hearing from right now?
Yeah, I mean, leaders are generally speaking pretty fried. They're pretty tired and exhausted. I think we're reaching kind of back up to where we were at the height of the pandemic in terms of burnout. Organizations, the world has become a bit destabilized, and then the organization itself is becoming destabilized through the various economic pressures and the implications of that. So organizations that have had to lay off 10 to 15% of their staff. If you think about it, an organization went into hyperdrive during COVID in terms of hiring, and they're now, doing the opposite. So it's literally a roller coaster. And so that creates more work with less resources. And so people find themselves really bogged down in execution, and in tasks and in areas that kind of all relate and pertain to execution and productivity, at the expense of team cohesion, alignment, and the different capacities around team culture that are really important to counterbalance the capacities in team productivity. So net, I think the biggest challenge for leaders is they're struggling to harness the multiplier effect that a great team can deliver on if that team is high performing. So people are delivering as individuals right now effectively, and there's strong output individually, but teams are not necessarily rowing together in sync in the same direction. And so there's a lot of upside that's lost and a lot of inefficiency in energy expenditure as a result of not being able to harness the potential of high performing teams.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, this is a challenging time for leaders, and that's no question about it. So, what are the most important skills that leaders will need in order to navigate and lead during unprecedented times? And how can HR and talent leaders specifically build those skills within their organizations?
Yeah, I think clear communication is really, really important. If you had one training to give right now, I think a course in communication, executive communication, and how it pertains to coaching, performance management, vision setting. Communication is really, really important. As are the interpersonal effectiveness skills of bringing people together, connecting, empathizing, being compassionate. I'd say that's another really important area. The last area, which really does pertain to interpersonal effectiveness, is team effectiveness skills. So teams don't just come together and become high performing. It actually takes a lot of work, and there's an art and science to it. And team leaders really will benefit right now from learning those skills, and how to orchestrate a high performing team. I think are going to be really, they've always been really important, right? There's nothing new under the sun here, but really important right now, especially when we're talking about an environment where we have to do more with less people. Let's figure out how to get everybody sort of leveled up on those core areas of communication, interpersonal effectiveness, coaching skills in particular, and then team effectiveness skills.
Yeah. Do you feel like that is certainly going to be an area of focus that the HR department has to be more on top of going forward in 2023 and beyond? And what mistakes are you seeing? Do you expect organizations to be making in the months ahead? I mean, communication is definitely one, and it's key. But are there any others?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges in HR is there's always a fire somewhere, right? And it can become overwhelming, and then we start to put out the fires individually rather than thinking about what is going on systemically, and what can we do. If we have a finite amount of budget resources, how do we get the greatest ROI on our investments in developing our people? And so taking a systemic lens is, I think, really important. And if we're not taking a systemic lens, then HR can rapidly devolve into a whack-a-mole dynamic where things pop up, we whack them all, but then something else pops up here. So relating that to some of the advice we're giving to clients around team effectiveness, for example, we could do a team effectiveness for one team that might be in distress, or we could look at all teams that are critical in the organization, and invest in them, by introducing the foundational skills of team effectiveness, providing those leaders support, potentially going through a diagnostic of where the team is so that we could isolate gaps and opportunities within those teams that those leaders can then subsequently work on. I think that the bolder and more systemic HR is able to address their organizational challenges, the greater the outcome and the more sustainable any change will be.
This whole idea of coaching I want to get into now. I think now is definitely a great time to make sure leaders are empowered so that they can create better teams and
Mhm.
and lead better and create better ROI and results, as you mentioned. So, why is coaching such an effective tool for helping leaders build new skills?
At AIR Consulting, we're really focused on identifying the key areas for a leader that if they were to close this gap, if they were to advance their skills in this area, if they were able to mitigate this risk based on how they're kind of wired from a personality standpoint, then it will lead to a disproportionate outcome in terms of their leadership effectiveness. So what we do at AIR is we really spend a lot of time actually in the assessment phase. AIR stands for Assessment, Insight, Implementation, Reinforcement. So in that
Oh,
assessment
nice.
phase, we really want to understand with crystal clarity what are those key points of leverage that if we spend our energy and time focused on, we can really move the needle in a disproportionate way. So we do that assessment. We help the leader make meaning of their assessment data, which usually is 360 assessment data, psychometric assessment data, and something we call developmental history data, which is essentially, the individual's narrative and their life experience. We take all that and look for where the sort of converging opportunities, and we put that into a development plan. That development plan then becomes the roadmap for the rest of the coaching engagement, where we go into implementation. So we have assessment, insight, implementation is where the rubber meets the road. That's where we take that development plan and we execute on it through one-to-one coaching sessions. And that's where the coach comes in with their support, their motivation, different interventions and ways of practicing skills that are new, and getting that individual outside of their comfort zone, to really elevate and advance their game. As we get towards the end of a coaching engagement, we start to focus on reinforcement and sustainability, and that's the final phase. We like to say at AIR, change is not so hard. It isn't like I can go to a Tony Robbins seminar over 1 or 2 days and actually probably change, but ask me how I am 3 weeks later, right? So change is not even half the battle. It's reinforcing that change and sustaining it over time is the real trick to great coaching. And that's what we take a lot of pride in at AIR Consulting.
I totally agree with that, Jonathan. And I think the most successful companies in the industry and any industry really are the ones who are always working to push their industry forward. And how is AIR Consulting pushing the coaching and leadership development forward? I know you touched upon it a little bit, but in what ways are you making sure that your clients are experiencing the growth that they need in leadership for the future?
So I mean, I think we take pride in sort of a Kaizen approach to quality. So we're always looking for refinements. We spend a lot of attention on finding the best coaches in the world, have a very rigorous vetting process to find the very best coaches. And then subsequently, we have group supervision and learning in our coach community to advance our coaches, and we continuously measure results, so we know we have great performance data of our coaching. So I think we do a great job in those areas. That's not necessarily, though, helping us innovate. That's just helping us be excellent. In the innovation space, the area that we're really focused on right now is probably twofold. One is making coaching less of a once every 3-week thing and making it more of a 24/7 thing. Mm-hmm. So some of the things we're focused on is how do we get a leader to be thinking about their development plan, practicing some of the actions that they committed to with higher frequency and more pervasiveness than just waiting every 2 to 3 weeks for their coaching session. So we designed technology, we call it the coaching zone, that really supports that concept. It's a place where all of your information converges in a very secure, confidential space shared between the coach and the coachee. And our goal with the coaching zone is that there's a content feed, and just like I could go on Twitter or any social media platform or LinkedIn anytime, anywhere. I could go on my coaching zone and really be enriched by the content and areas that pertain to my coaching objectives. The other area of innovation is also within technology, and that's through a digital AI coaching assistant that we are creating in our R&D lab. And there's some fascinating research about AI digital coaching assistants, or coach bots, that they have statistically significant efficacy in helping people achieve their goals, even independent of a human coach. And so it's extremely compelling. These are very well done research designs that have been published. Dr. Nikki Terblanche, who's the leading expert in that field, is actually also collaborating with us in designing our AI digital coach bot. And we believe our hypothesis is that the combination of a human coach and a digital chatbot, that will be a 1 + 1 = 3 combination. And the question is why? We believe that a well-designed chatbot, and we're calling it AIIR, by the way. So AIIR, which will, starting in February, come alongside every coaching engagement we do at AIIR. We believe that a well-designed coaching chatbot will be able to really bolster the R in AIIR, the reinforcement phase, and help leaders strengthen their commitments, the meaning making, and the skills, in the same way that doing more reps in the gym is going to make your muscle stronger. We believe the parallel here is the more times I focus on my development plan goal, if it's communication effectiveness or executive presence or setting vision, the more I focus on that, the stronger that muscle is going to be. And we have a lot of conviction that the combination of both AIIR and the human coach is going to be able to deliver on that.
That's some fascinating stuff, and I'm excited to hear about AIIR and
we can even get you AIIR.
Yeah, I think so. I would love that, and just the fact that AIIR is working with some of the most leading world-class brands out there: Allstate, Citi, Cisco, Geico, KPMG, just to name a few. It's you guys are doing some great work, and Jonathan, I can't let you go. Here at Millennium Live, we like to just end the session by having a nice quick note about the future and where you see things going. And we've talked a lot about leading effectively, and in your opinion, beyond the current moment and right now, what do leaders need to do in order to remain effective leaders?
Yeah, I can't 100% see around the bend, and my crystal ball broke last night. but I would venture to say that over the next 6 months, leaders really are going to play a crucial role in stabilizing their organizations and inspiring their people. So leaders that are able to do that, to bring some stabilization and also invigorating through inspiring messages and clear communication, that's going to separate, the good leaders from the best leaders. Leadership is, it's been pretty helpful for humanity for at least several thousand years, right? And also, quite destructive if it's bad leadership. So, longer term, it's carry on. Let's keep building great leaders. What do great leaders mean, though? In the new next, that I think it's really being proficient in a world that is more complex, more abstract, and by that I mean I may have a workforce of 20,000 people that, and I only see 200 of them, because that's all that come to the office on a regular basis. And so how do I account for a virtual workforce, and have equity and engagement, when we're experiencing all the complexity, associated with that. So I think leaders will continue to need to stretch, and there'll be a real premium on adaptability and learning mindset. Leaders that approach work and their job with a fixed mindset, and they know exactly what needs to be done, and they're directive about that and inflexible, are going to be very limited in the future. So I think that flexibility and learning mindset is going to be really, really important.
I 100% agree. Thank you so much, Jonathan Kirschner, for leading this great conversation with me here on Millennium Live, and talking about all the ways that we're empowering leaders and teams today, creating better leaders, which are creating better companies, which are creating a better world. So thank you again, and looking forward to what's next, the new next.
Thank you so much. It was really, really enjoyed this conversation.